Welcome to the Explainer. All right, we are jumping right in today because we are taking a fascinating, entirely impartial look at the hidden dynamics of power, deception, and human psychology. We're going to explore the invisible architecture of how influence actually works out there in the real world. We'll be deconstructing about the tactics and the deep mental wiring of people who view everyday social interaction as, well, a grand strategic game.
And honestly, there's absolutely no better starting point than this brilliantly brutal observation from the Renaissance political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli. He wrote, "It is not necessary for a leader to possess all the good qualities. It is enough to appear to have them." Now, what's so interesting here is how perfectly it captures the idea of reputation acting as armor. For centuries, this concept has shocked people, but it isolates a fundamental psychological reality. In the theater of power, your reality is your battlefield, but your appearance is your shield.
So this really brings us to the core paradox of our journey today. I want you to just stop and ask yourself, is virtue an actual moral compass, or is it just a highly strategic mask? As we peel back the onion of deception layer by layer throughout this explainer, we're going to see what really lies beneath everyday success and uncover exactly why some of the most influential people around us operate under a completely different set of rules.
Okay, let's get into Section 1, the art of the mask, focusing on strategic virtue.
We're always taught from a young age that honesty and kindness are rewarded, but the historical and psychological sources we're examining today suggest that leading with an unprotected heart actually leaves you incredibly vulnerable. Projecting virtue isn't always about just being fake. Very often it's about calculated positioning. Think about a corporate CEO who loudly champions sustainability to the public while ruthlessly making hard private cuts to save the company. Or politicians who meticulously curate these compassionate gestures purely to win elections. Or even just everyday coworkers who smile and nod in meetings while silently disagreeing, just to keep the peace. In all of these cases, displaying virtue serves a direct strategic purpose. When appearances matter more than the unfiltered truth, virtue simply becomes leverage.
And you can see these concepts deeply rooted absolutely everywhere in modern popular culture today. For instance, Robert Greene's massively popular book, The 48 Laws of Power. It essentially synthesizes the philosophies of Machiavelli and others into a modern rulebook. It's just a prime example of how the desire to understand these hidden mechanics of power and, to protect oneself against them is still incredibly relevant to us right now.
But here's the thing. Simply wearing a mask isn't enough, which brings us to Section 2, the illusion of effortlessness and how to hide the strings. To really understand how this is achieved, we have to look at this absolutely fascinating concept from the Renaissance called sprezzatura. Coined way back in Baldassare Castiglione's 1528 Book of the Courtier, sprezzatura is defined as a studied carelessness. It's the ability to perform incredibly difficult, highly calculated tasks with effortless grace, completely concealing all the art and conscious effort behind them. Basically, it's the art of acting deviously and strategically without ever looking like you're even trying.
And actually, the art world from back then gives us the absolute perfect visual test to illustrate how sprezzatura works in practice. During the Renaissance, painters were judged specifically on this ability to hide the painstaking effort of their craft.
Just compare two depictions of Joseph from the early 1500s. First, you have Perugino's work. The grace is obvious, sure, but there's this rigid profile and a highly calculated, S-like movement to the body. It looks like art. You can tell he tried hard. But then his student Raphael applies sprezzatura. Raphael softens the features, avoids dramatic highlights, and breaks those rigid lines. He introduces a feeling of complete nonchalance. True mastery and true deception lies in making the deeply complex look completely and utterly natural.
So how exactly do people maintain this illusion in real life? Let's dive right into Section 3, the power of secrecy, and examine their tactical behavior.
Our sources note something super interesting. Courtiers are like magicians. If you deceptively play with appearances, you can never ever let people see your tricks. Because revealing the devices behind your sprezzatura instantly transforms you from a master of grace into just an untrustworthy rogue. A stellar reputation depends far more on what is carefully concealed than on what is revealed.
Mechanically speaking, from a purely Machiavellian perspective, there are exactly two ways a secret can be destroyed, and they have to be managed with incredible precision. Number one is physical evidence, which must be systematically hidden or entirely eliminated. Number two is loose lips. A strategic mind knows that the rumor mill is fatal. Telling just one person means the whole world will eventually know. So the only real defense is absolute silence.
And tracking those secrets requires a highly precise mental map. The texts point out that strategic operators actually categorize their deception on a strict timeline. First, you have forever secrets, which are meant to be concealed until the day you die.
Then there are temporary secrets, hidden only until they become tactically useful, like, say, secretly interviewing for a job at a rival corporation until the offer is officially signed. But there is a massive trap here, the exponential threat. The complexity increases exponentially with every single added lie. The more lies you tell, the more mental energy it takes just to keep the mask from slipping.
And this brings us to the incredibly heavy psychological weight of secrecy, which we can call the transparency paradox. If people even slightly suspect you're hiding something, human nature completely compels them to relentlessly dig for it. Therefore, the master of the mask must flawlessly appear to be entirely open and totally transparent, precisely to protect the secrets they're actually holding.
Which is exactly why you'll find this specific piece of advice in modern power playbooks, specifically law number 4, always say less than necessary. By remaining vague, open-ended, and kind of sphinx-like, you drastically minimize your points of vulnerability. You impress and intimidate simply by restricting the flow of information.
All right, so who actually thinks like this day in and day out? Let's move to Section 4, inside the Machiavellian mind, and explore their specific cognitive wiring.
This number might genuinely surprise you. Research suggests that roughly 1% of the general population possesses psychopathic traits at levels similar to incarcerated populations. Let that sink in. That means these highly strategic, emotionally detached individuals are not just figures in history books, they are sitting right next to us in corporate boardrooms, navigating everyday society completely undetected. Now, clinical researchers do draw some distinct lines here regarding what they call affective deficits, which is basically how they process emotion. Psychopathy often involves specific deficits in recognizing fear or distress in other people, which can lead to really impulsive, antisocial behavior. Machiavellianism, on the other hand, is described more as an across-the-board emotional blunting. They process emotions just long enough to extract the information they need to manipulate a situation, and then they essentially just turn that emotion off. But the absolutely crucial point here is that both types share a powerful core trait: callous unemotionality.
Let's break down exactly how their empathy functions. Psychologists actually divide empathy into 2 distinct types. Hot empathy is spontaneous. It's when you actually feel someone else's pain right along with them. Dark personalities score incredibly low on this. But then there's cold empathy, which is purely calculated. It's the cognitive ability to read someone's emotions. On scales measuring strategic emotional control, they score extremely high. They know exactly what you are feeling, but they have the chilling ability to just logically decide whether or not to let it influence their actions.
Without that spontaneous empathy acting as a natural brake system, a very, very different worldview develops. This brings us to our final part, Section 5, Strange Moralities, and what's known as the cool syndrome.
Clinical researchers refer to this phenomenon as the cool syndrome. Because these individuals lack standard emotional friction, they operate with a highly efficient toolkit. They easily bypass inconvenient emotions like shame or guilt. If something goes wrong, they automatically attribute blame to external sources. They operate on situationally based relativistic ethics, which basically means the rules only apply to them when they are useful. And they view the world with preemptive pragmatism, meaning they act expediently and strike first because they assume everyone else out there is just as cynical as they are.
So the fundamental takeaway from all this psychological research is simply this. These strange moralities are entirely self-centered and almost completely blind to the harm they cause to others. They do not view other people as feeling subjects deserving of care or respect. They view them merely as objects to be outmaneuvered on a giant chessboard.
It is a deeply, deeply cynical worldview, and it's perfectly summarized by this adaptation of Machiavelli's thought that is often used in modern psychological studies. A man would be a fool to throw away his sword when other men are only hiding theirs. This core belief is the exact engine that justifies their constant deception, their strategic grace, and their never-ending need for control.
So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a real thought-provoker to chew on. We've looked at the hidden mechanics of deception, the illusion of grace, and the deep psychology of the mask. So take a moment and look around you. Who's wearing a mask in your life? And perhaps more importantly, what are you hiding behind yours? Think about that and keep your eyes open.